Hello and welcome to the MMA ECO live podcast. I am your host, Chris Presnell, coming at you live from beautiful Portland, Oregon, USA. This is episode 18 of the podcast. And if you don't know me, my work, I work with my own page, MMA Ecosystem. Also work for Tapology. I've worked as a manager, worked in MMA media, writing for a couple different sites. Happy to have you here on this beautiful day. And today, as usual on the podcast, what I will do is go through the Asian MMA schedule for the upcoming weekend, highlight prospects, break down some storylines, and then get to your questions in the comments. So if you have any questions about anything I'm saying or anything on your mind about MMA in general or anything else even bigger than that, feel free to drop them in the comments. Please keep it kind. Please keep it civil. But without further ado, I want to get into today's topics because there's a lot of different things I want to get into. Just a few Asian MMA events this weekend coming up. One big one, that's Bellator versus RIZIN. A couple other ones kind of spread out throughout Asia. Eventually, I want to get to the UFC Singapore card as well, because it looks like that card may be complete now with 13 fights. And I also want to get to some of the results from Chinese MMA last weekend. So if you have not already, please subscribe to the channel, putting out lots of great videos, trying to continually listen to you all, hearing what kind of videos you want me to cover over Asian MMA, and then making those videos, whether they be breakdowns, whether they be in-depth look at one fighter, or lots of other things around the wall, kind of off the wall with social media and the MMA media sphere, MMA media in general. Sorry, but yeah, sorry, I'm a little bit like scatterbrained right now because this whole week, starting early Sunday morning, I flew out back to my home state, Kansas, and got to hang out with a couple of my college buddies. We do this every year. We all meet up together, the five of us, and just kind of catch up on things, do lots of different fun things together. And that was this week. So I just got back from that late last night, and then woke up early this morning and had a video call, a meeting, and went back to the airport to pick up my sister-in-law. And then since then, just been running around doing a lot of different tasks. Have a lot of MMA to catch up from last weekend that I had to miss for various reasons. A lot of results to put in for Tapology. So I'm like just now reconnecting back to the MMA world. I was pretty disconnected from it for a couple days. So apologies if I don't make sense with some things I say. Got a fresh cup of coffee here, trying to keep it together. But the main thing I wanted to cover today was this Bellator versus RIZIN card. Definitely the biggest MMA event going on this weekend. A lot of interesting storylines around this fight card. Of course, AJ McKee had to pull out, and he was replaced by Roberto Souza. Yeah, interesting fight card, and I personally am really looking forward to it. I think that these are really fun ideas, that these kind of mashups we don't get very often in MMA, kind of at the highest level. And so I am excited for the card. I think it should be pretty exciting, both entertaining and providing a lot of intriguing stylistic matchups ahead of time. But a couple different storylines that, as I was thinking about this event today, that I was thinking through. And of course, first is like, is RIZIN going to be able to even the score or have any more success than they had last time? The last time that they had this Bellator versus RIZIN mashup, it didn't go great for RIZIN, right? They lost 0-5 because a lot of the Bellator fighters, really good wrestlers, out wrestled their Japanese opponents. But so I think that's the biggest storyline for me going into it. I do have this whole fight card prepared so I can show you sort of like what we're dealing with here. So this is the whole RIZIN and Bellator card. So I think one of the complaints around these events is that they're It's confusing to know how to watch them, when to watch them. You have to switch back and over. Sometimes there's tape delay. And then they just air at least for a North American audience at odd times. It's not my complaint because I know this isn't like tailored specifically and only with a North American audience in mind. But I do think that it's a little bit better this time because last time, if you remember, like the Showtime portion, the Bellator versus RIZIN portion, aired in the middle of the night, and then it aired on tape delay on Showtime at another, like the next day at like 8 o'clock p.m. So I think makes a little more sense this time. It's starting from the bottom going up. So you've got that Showtime card with 5 fights starting 8 p.m. Pacific, which for me on the West Coast is literally perfect. UFC card will be sort of in the last couple fights, maybe halfway through the pay-per-view, and then the RIZIN portion will start at midnight. So the Bellator portion is on Showtime, and then the RIZIN portion is on Fight TV, which is an app. You probably know the drill, but it's an app that can show combat sports pay-per-views, and that is $20. Should air at midnight Pacific or 3 a.m. Eastern. So that'll probably go into the early hours of the morning here in North America. But let's just look at this Bellator RIZIN portion here. Got Andre Korshkov versus Lawrence Larkin. Of course, that's just a straight up Bellator fight, as is Danny Sabatello. Really, most of these are straight up Bellator fights. Kana Watanabe versus Veta Arteaga. Glad to see that we get Kana Watanabe on it this time around. I believe she wasn't on the first Bellator RIZIN card, which is a shame, considering Bellator only has a few Japanese fighters. Would have loved to have seen a couple others as well. Masayuki Kukuri, would have loved to have him on this card. But this flyweight title is so good. You can throw it in there with some of the UFC 291 main card fights as one of the best fights of the weekend. Kyoji Horiguchi, who is a mainstay at flyweight, has been for years, has already proven that he is an elite flyweight. He is fighting the future of Japanese MMA, Makoto Shinryu Takahashi, which should be a great fight between a young up-and-comer and a savvy veteran. Kyoji Horiguchi used to be that young up-and-comer. He was kind of thrown to the wolves a little bit too early, fighting guys like Demetrius Johnson early in his MMA career, but now being at American Top Team for a while, being able to fight in Bellator and in RIZIN has really matured his game. He's pretty much fought everybody outside the UFC around his weight class, and so he's fighting a very, very interesting prospect in Shinryu. I think that should be a great fight. I would probably lean towards Horiguchi in that fight, just to side with the veteran experience. He's a very well-rounded dude as well. So I'm going to side with Horiguchi on that, with the full expectation that Shinryu could definitely pull off the upset and kind of become the next kingpin of Japanese MMA at that flyweight division. So that should be a great fight. And with this belt, I'll switch back to the card in a second. But with this Bellator flyweight championship, what's the end game here? It seems like a very odd time to be introducing a whole new weight class for Bellator. We've all heard the rumors about Bellator either selling or taking on a, quote, partner, as Scott Coker has said. What I would imagine that would mean is Bellator merging with another promotion. Merging, selling, who knows? Merging might imply that a lot of the staff from Bellator would merge with the staff from another promotion versus just the roster or select fighters from the Bellator roster moving over to another promotion. I don't know. I haven't heard anything about that. I did hear on P.T. Carroll and Ariel Helwani's podcast, P.T. Carroll had mentioned that he had heard that the Bellator Dublin show could be the last Bellator show. It's a little bit odd just because they're just like an event or two short of Bellator 300, where they could literally just stack a title fight from every single division on Bellator 300 if they're going to make that their last show. But we'll see how things pan out, but it does seem like a really interesting time to introduce a flyweight division if you're planning a major sale, acquisition, merger, what have you, which makes me wonder if this could be a one-off. This could just be a one-off. Hey, we want to put a title fight on this Bellator RIZIN card. We've got two amazing Japanese flyweights that perfectly fit the bill. Let's just have them fight for the flyweight title and elevate this whole event. That could be the situation. Or one of my theories this whole time has been that Bellator and RIZIN are going to permanently join forces. I don't have any evidence to back that up. I haven't heard anything, but just with the friendship between these two organizations and these two promoters, and Scott Coker and Nobuyuki Sakakibara, it does make me wonder if they are going to try and make a play to unite in an audience from Japan with their North American audience and make kind of super promotion, which would definitely open the door for this flyweight division in Bellator. Whether it becomes just RIZIN or just Bellator or an organization with a new name, it would pave the way for them to be able to say, we're putting our champion from RIZIN against Bellator's champion to find out who the new champion of this new promotion is. I think that feels really likely to me. And I know that RIZIN, I've heard a rumor that RIZIN is planning to have a show in Hawaii, maybe by the end of the year or next year. Because Sakakibara has been out to Hawaii to look at that venue, and I've heard from someone close to the situation that RIZIN is hoping to hold a show in Hawaii, which would be their American debut. Would definitely be a lot better for the time zones. At least Hawaii, I think Hawaii is 4 hours earlier than Pacific time, but yeah, could definitely see a Bellator RIZIN merger. If Bellator is going to stick around in the form that it is currently in for a long time and just maybe pick up some different ownership or leadership, that flyweight division, for the longest time, flyweight was really only, the UFC was really only the promotion, the only promotion that could host a healthy flyweight division. Well, the UFC now has 50 fighters in their flyweight division. And there are so many good flyweights out there, especially throughout Asia, that could potentially be in the UFC, but are not. You look at Road to UFC, and flyweight is the most stacked bracket out of all of them. Seeing like tons of fighters from Kazakhstan that are flyweights being signed to the UFC. I think if Bellator wanted to start a flyweight division, the time is now, and there's tons of fighters from Russia and all throughout Central Asia and the Eurasia region that they can definitely bring into the Bellator ranks and expand their audience. I still don't know, like I heard Luke Thomas saying this week, like, I don't know if that's like the ace up their sleeve that they need to like give Bellator that next like boost in popularity. But at least from a hardcore fan perspective, the option is there for Bellator to do that. And I think that there's plenty of fighters out there that they could build the division around. So very interesting that they're introducing the flyweight division at this time, but an amazing fight in Takahashi versus Horiguchi to kick things off. Let's go back to the fight card. Not going to go through all these fights, but we do have Patricky Freire versus Roberto Satoshi D'Souza. That's a new fight this week. And then kind of going up with another new fight this week, Chihiro Suzuki fighting Patricio Freire. That is a great fight. We've got Tofik Musayev versus Akira Okada. And then after the intermission, three amazing fights. We've got Seika Izawa versus Claire Lopez. Seikazawa, a very busy Japanese fighter that is one of the best Japanese fighters at the moment. And then the bantamweight championship, Hiromasa Ogikubo versus Juan Archuleta. Should be a really interesting fight. I feel like this will probably be a win for Juan Archuleta. But Ogikubo is always tough. He's a really good grappler, and hopefully, if this hits the ground, it'll be an exciting fight. Hopefully, it won't be. There's always the potential that it might be not that exciting, but with Ogikubo's great submission skills, hopefully it'll be interesting. And then the main event, you've got Mikuru Asakura versus Vugar Karma. Kind of an interesting fight to top the whole thing off with. Would have loved to have seen one of those title fights in the main event, but there you go. Asakura, very popular guy. So yeah, that's the elephant in the room with this whole event is the Bellator sale. I think it's a great card. I honestly think it's a little bit better top to bottom than the last one. I think that there should be a lot of really great, entertaining fights on this card. I like that they didn't just stack it all up with kind of how they did last time, because that ended up being a wash for Bellator. A lot of really good wrestlers kind of able to carry through with the clean sweep there. But the other thing that I am a little bit disappointed with is just the date, right? So this will start airing at the exact same time as the main card of UFC 291, and then there's also the Spence Crawford boxing fight going on at the same time. So, man, if they would have literally just pushed this a day earlier, I don't know if the arena was available at that time, but just a day earlier to air on Friday night instead of Saturday night, there is hardly any combat sports going on, especially on the MMA side, Friday night, tomorrow night. And so I feel like if they would have just gone back a day earlier, they would have had all the coverage. They would have had the whole night to themselves. And at this point, I feel like a lot of it's just going to be buried under the other combat sports headlines. So that's unfortunate. Wish they would have gone back a day earlier than that. But a couple other fight cards, not a lot of other like big events going on this weekend, but you've got Alash Pride 87 that's going down in is that either Astana or Almaty, Kazakhstan. I looked over that card. Not a lot of things that really stood out to me. A lot of fighters making their pro debuts, a lot of fighters with 3 fights or less, but those Alash Pride cards, always fun, provide some good highlights. CFC is a promotion based out of Thailand. They've got a card going on Saturday. Looked over that card, a lot of kind of foreign fighters that train out of Thailand, kind of a hodgepodge of different fighters. I need to look at that card a little bit more closely. I haven't really had time to do so, but kind of a mixed bag of that card. And then this MMA Global Series. I'm not sure, is this the same as the Russian promotion MMA series? Because at first I thought it was MMA series, which is like been a Russian promotion, but it says MMA Global. So let me look up this card. There are a couple prospects that I'm kind of interested in on this card. So yeah, so we have this listed. This is MMA series. This is let me share my screen with you so you can see this card. MMA series, Russian promotion. This card is called MMA Global Series, and the event airs from Dubai, and some a lot of international flair to it. Some Russian fighters, looks like some Egyptian fighters, some Tajik fighters, a couple Asian fighters that I wanted to highlight. This guy Fahad Khan, a 5-0 Indian flyweight. He is fighting Maksudjan Kadyrov out of Tajikistan. This guy managed by my friend Alexander. Wishing Fahad Khan luck. Also, you have this Pakistani guy, Abbas Khan, fighting Marcel Santos, who, look at this, 5-1 versus 44, 40-0, 84 fight veteran, this guy. So Abbas Khan, let's take a look at him and his record. 31-year-old welterweight, and fought some decent competition. That's much better than a lot of other fighters from Pakistan at this point in their career. He's fought for Brave 4 times, Shalmenko FC, Ari Warriors 2, and fought some fighters with some good experience, at least early in his career. So he could be one to watch. And then let's just look at Fahad Khan's record as well. 21-year-old flyweight. So that's worth noting. His record, not as much experience. So this fight against a 4-3 Tajik guy, a little bit more kind of right where he's at. Fighting, a guy that's 4-3. So, and fighting a guy from Tajikistan rather than an Indian fighter. This should be good for him to fight someone that he has not fought before. I believe this is an internet pay-per-view, this event. So some interesting matchups here. I always love these cards that have fighters from all around the globe. So should be interesting. MMA Global Series. All right, so that pretty much covers the MMA Asian MMA schedule for the weekend. But a couple more things I wanted to go over. So the UFC Singapore card, I counted up the fights today, and with the Giga Chikadze and Alex Caceres edition that was announced by MMA Junkie today, I believe that makes 13 fights, which is usually what we get for an average UFC Fight Night card. Sometimes you see 1 or 2 more added on there just kind of as an insurance, but this fight card could be done. So let's take a look at this fight as well. I think this is a pretty awesome card. Didn't end up with a ton of Asian fighters on it, or at least some of their top fighters. A couple other fighters, 2 other Asian fighters, Jekka Sargi and Park Sung-hyun, still don't have fights. And as far as I know, they are healthy. So interested and curious why they were not added to this card. I'm going to follow up with those guys to see if they have any plans to be on the event. But looky here. So we have, this is most likely our main card, and that, especially for a Fight Night card, is an amazing main card. Max Holloway versus Korean Zombie, Chidi Njokuani versus Mikhail Oleksiejczuk, Anthony Smith versus Ryan Spann rematch. Kind of a needless rematch, but I think just a lot of other opponents were booked, and it made sense. And their first fight, like there was a little bit of back and forth there, so sure, why not? Aaron Blanchfield versus Tyler Santos. That should be the co-main, in my opinion. Definitely the most consequential fight outside of the main event. Potentially even more than the main event. That's a fantastic fight. That was supposed to be the main event of a UFC Fight Night card in Vegas back in February, if you remember. And then just added today, Giga Chikadze versus Alex Caceres. That is an amazing fight. Should be really exciting. We've also got Rinya Nakamura on the card. You've got Liang Na on the card. Misaku Kinoshita. And then you've got Junior Tafa versus Parker Porter rebook. That should be fun. Song Kanan versus Roland Duboya should be a lot of fun. And then this week we've also added Choi Sung-woo and Toshiyoma Kazama. So I think it should be a really entertaining fight card. As far as entertainment goes, I think it should be a lot of fun, especially this main card. There's a lot of ranked fighters on there, or a lot of guys just outside the top 15. And I think just that main card in and of itself should guarantee, or should convince you to wake up early and watch this fight card if you are in North America. Otherwise, not a lot of like top Asian prospects on the card, except I put Rinya Nakamura on there, but I think they wanted this card to be have a lot more Asian talent on it, but so many of those fighters were injured or just not ready for the event, so didn't get as many of them, I think, as they would have liked to get on the card. Not, like your Li Jingliang, he's injured. A lot of your Chinese fighters are booked. Song Yadong, of course, is off the Boston card. He was supposed to be on the Boston card a week earlier. Zhang Weili, of course, on that Boston card. But and then Yan Xiaonan, most likely waiting for the winner of Zhang and Lemos. So, yeah, but either way, the Singapore fans should have a great fight card on their hands. A couple Asian fighters on there. Really looking forward to that. Sorry, I forgot to share the event there, but let's move on to some Chinese MMA results from last weekend. So guys, this was so frustrating. So last weekend we had a plethora of Chinese MMA events, and in my head on my schedule, I'm like, all right, Friday, Saturday, I'm going to be waking up at 4 a.m. to cover and get the results from all these events. And then Sunday, I was traveling early morning, but there was part 2 of Fight King on that day. And it just like, one after one, these events just had tons of broadcast issues. And for me, like, I know at this point of doing record keeping for Chinese MMA, for some events, if you don't watch the event live, then I may not be able to get the results may not show up later on the internet. So I'm like trying to get all the results for these events. And first up, I was on Friday was the Liangshan Torch Festival. And that whole event ended up being a total mess. They held it outdoors in Sichuan province. There was tons of rain. The canvas was extremely slippery. They kept having to clear it off. They held up this, like they pinned up this translucent, really flimsy tarp from the rigging, even over the lights, over the cage. It was like collecting water. And it was just, they eventually started the event an hour late because of the rain. Eventually the rain kind of died down. They were able to start the event, but still there was a lot of water blowing on the canvas. It was a total mess. Fighters slipping all over the place. I mean, it really, like, when you hear Dana White say things about like, yeah, we're not sure if we want to hold an event at Croke Park in Ireland or an outdoor event in the UK in general. I know Ireland's not in the UK, but you get the idea. The bigger those islands, England and Ireland and everywhere around there, because of all the rain that could happen. I really start to understand why he says things like that. But yeah, that event was kind of a mess. I did eventually get the results from that event, but at first they actually cut the stream because of weather. They said that because of weather, we have to stop the live broadcast, but we will eventually post the fight videos. And so, great. Am I ever going to get these results? I tried to like kind of sift through Douyin a little bit and see if I could find some of the results, but eventually got the results sent to me by a guy in the UFC PI. And so let me see if I can bring up these results. There's a lot more fights than this, but these are some of the highlights, some of the most consequential fights. Cholun beat Dezavon Souza by unanimous decision. Huang Yele beat Samuel Oliveira by unanimous decision. Agulali won his fight by KO. Xiebin won his fight by TKO. A little bit of confusion over their opponents and what I was sent, so still hunting down the names of the opponents on there. Li Zhongwu beat Farouz Saifeyev via TKO in round 1. So Wang won his fight by rear naked choke. Li Yunfeng won his fight by arm triangle, and Rugajun also won his fight by TKO. Tons of Unboil guys. I think all those except for Xiebin are originally from the Unboil Fight Gym. A lot of these fighters, kind of the next generation of Unboil Fight. Your old guard is, Cholun, Rongju, Sumu Darji, those guys, and then all the rest of those guys are sort of the next wave. Not sure if all of them will make it into like UFC level, but I think a couple of them will. I could see Li Zhongwu making it there. I could see Agulali, definitely Huang Yele, him, if not by the end of the year. A couple of those guys a little bit green, but have some promise there. Li Yunfeng, I think if he give him a couple more years, and I think he could be there. Rugajun, and also potentially Zhou Wang. not totally sure on him yet. Need to see a little bit more from him. Yeah, I'll eventually get those events up on Tapology and add as much detail as I can, see if I can find some fight videos there. But also throughout the weekend, some other highlights. Dragon FC, this was the only event that I was able to watch in its completion. In the main event, you had Ibu Gola coming back from Road to UFC, getting a very nice knee KO over Kengo Fujimura in round 2. And then the fight that everyone was talking about, Wang Song versus Tei Murayama, she absolutely put on a clinic over Tei Murayama and won the fight by first round head kick knockout. And I think that she could have ended that fight even earlier. She was just putting on a striking clinic and finally just put away her opponent with the head kick. I think that you'll probably see her booked in another fight in China within the next month or two. And then if she can make it to 3-0, I think that you could see her on a UFC event in China by the end of the year. So that's the plan, and it's going according to schedule. Zhu Kongjie had a really pretty KO over Li Minhyuk via KO. Hit him with an elbow, then a head kick, I think just 20 seconds into round 1. So Dragon FC, pretty entertaining MMA fights there, all of them ended in finishes. Fight King had 2 days, back-to-back days of fights. This was in Hohhot, Inner Mongolia, China. A fighter that I'm keeping an eye on, not really ready to declare him a prospect yet, but he's had some good wins and some good exposure. Zhou Qiyang beat a Russian opponent named Ali by rear naked choke in round 2. He's slow, he's young, and he's slowly coming along as a decent potential prospect. But he's had some good exposure, and he's fought on the One Championship show as well, one of the reality shows. Yan Shi-Hui beat Ding Miao versus Thea Kimura in round 1. Zhao Zhikong, I left out how he won there, but he did win his fight. Zhao Zhikong won his fight. And then Bulletfly FC. Oh, by the way, Fight King, I tried to watch it, but as I was watching it, whoever the streamer was kept on, like, they're streaming through VLC, and something was going wrong with VLC, and it kept the stream kept dropping. So that was a streamer issue. Bulletfly FC, I also tried to watch that, but ended up that you had to pay to watch the event, and I think you needed a Chinese phone number to be able to pay. So wasn't able to watch that either, but fortunately I was able to track down the results on that. They can be kind of a tricky organization to get the results from, but they actually posted all the results. So I'll have all of these events up on Tapology, hopefully tomorrow. But Li Haojie in the main event beat Liu Peng Shuai versus technical unanimous decision in round 2. Not sure what the foul was there, but he was able to get the win there and pick up the Bulletfly FC Bantamweight Championship. So those are some results for you from Chinese MMA. And with that, appreciate you hanging with me in there. I think there's a lot of great prospects out of that selection. But let's get over to your questions. And let's see. Kendra, you were always my first comment. I really appreciate that. Do you think Toshiomi Kazama has had enough time to recover after being brutally KO'd from Rinya Nakamura in February? I'd like to see more fighters take a year off after such a brutal KO. I mean, yeah, people have been talking about that with Alex Fajeda being knocked out by Izzy coming back this weekend just after 4 months. So that's definitely interesting. But everyone's different. Every knockout manifests itself differently. I personally, what was that, back in February, and it's now July, so 5 months. It is a quick turnaround, but only Kazama and his doctors could answer that question. 5 months isn't necessarily concerning to me. I think 4 months is pushing it, but I agree. I would like at least 9 months after a brutal knockout for a fighter to hang back and recover, and just like go back to the drawing board a little bit as well. Kazama is getting a very different style of opponent in Garrett Armfield at UFC Singapore. So I guess it'll be 6 months because it'll be end of August. But yeah, I'm okay with it. I think they're giving Kazama like one of the guys at the very, very bottom of the totem pole at bantamweight. So I'm okay with this fight. And yeah, we'll see. I think Kazama has a lot of talent, especially in grappling. He's really, really talented grappler. So I am excited to see what he can do. Did you know that Kana Watanabe used to be a meme on Drake's old show where all the live chats stand her? I didn't. I'll have to ask Drake about that. I was able to get coffee with him the other day, and so I was buying a microphone from him. But yeah, I'll have to ask him about that. Do you believe that Kyoji Horiguchi is one of the 3 125 kings? Cejudo, Johnson, Horiguchi. Kyoji is really talented, and not many know and give Johnson fits on the feet at the age of 22. Let's see. Who are the top flyweights of all time? Definitely Cejudo and Demetrius Johnson. Next, after that, it's hard to really say Figueiredo or Moreno, just because neither of them have been able to hold the belt for very much time. Of course, now Toja beating Brandon Moreno. So yeah, it's like since Cejudo and Johnson, flyweight in the UFC has had a lot of really quick turnover. Yeah, I think I would say that. I think I would say Horiguchi is probably number 3 all time at flyweight. Yeah, for sure. Russell J. His tweet about the road to UFC finalists was very based. No, I remember you tweeting that, and I totally agree. Why is it that the UFC signed the 2 fighters from the finals this year, Jekka and Kazama? They signed those 2 guys that got knocked out. Didn't sign the 2 fighters that put up competitive decisions, Choi Sung-gook and Ija, and made them go through the tournament again. I heard that Sean Shelby was not that pleased with Ija's performance, and that's why he wasn't signed. But still, he was so competitive, and could be a really like. I think he has some star potential for the Chinese market. He is I think pretty popular among the Chinese fans, and man, at the very least, just give him a non-tournament fight. Very strange to me. Jekka, I can kind of understand, since he's the first Indonesian UFC fighter. He is super, super popular in Indonesia. And even though I didn't think his performance was enough to earn him a UFC contract, I can see why the UFC would sign him to just like hope like, hey, let's just get him, let's keep him with like a really good gym for a little while, let him develop a little bit more, and then hopefully we can strike gold if he eventually develops the right way. I can kind of see that. Kazama, while he's got a lot of talent, I was a little bit surprised that they signed him, just because that fight was pretty one-sided. They've got a lot of other really good Japanese prospects that they can kind of hang their hat on. So I was surprised about that as well. Which Asian flyweights would you like to see picked up by Bellator? Great question. Well, there's a lot of good Japanese fighters that they could pick up. I'd have to look at. I have a hard time like remembering people off the top of my head, but I think that there's some good Kazakh flyweights that still have not been signed by the UFC, and there's some good Japanese ones as well. Let me just. I have some rankings that I just kind of use for my own reference here. I'd share it with you, but it's kind of a mess. Gosh, there's a lot of Japanese flyweights. It signed Yuma Horiguchi, Yuto Uda. Let's see. Wataru Yamauchi. He'd be cool. If for whatever reason Ray Tsuruya doesn't work out in Road to UFC, you could sign him. Then let's look at Kazakhstan. Hey, maybe you could give Jalgis Jumagulov another try. Alibi Idris, Niza guy. He could be pretty good. Those are some of the fighters I would recommend. There's probably a lot from Russia. Like there's always fighters from Russia that you could sign. But yeah, that's who I would go through. That's who I would go to at first. Drake Aronis, ooh. Uh-oh, watch out, Drake. Erroneously made Seika Izawa his fighter of the year in 2022 and was clearly Zhang Weili. Since when is beating 3 scrubs and going to a close decision with Park better than finishing 2 champions? That is interesting. I have noticed Drake really is high on Seika Izawa. And it's not that Seika Izawa is not a top fighter out of Japan right now. I just think that Seika Izawa has hit her. I think that she's already like exhausted what she can do in her current pool. If she moved over to one championship, there'd be a few more really good fights for her there. But being as young as she is, I wonder if she would exhaust that at some point, especially since it feels like some of the MMA divisions in one championship are shrinking. I feel like Izawa has to move to the UFC at some point if she's not just going to keep fighting the same people over and over or keep fighting, like you said, scrubs. Yeah, I think Izawa is good, but she doesn't like blow the doors off it for me. Like some of her fights are still pretty close, right? Fights with Park Soo-woo have been close at times. So I would not put her as like my, I can't remember if it was like what he said, if there's Asian fighter of the year, Japanese fighter or whatever. But yeah, maybe that's something Drake and I can debate. I appreciate his enthusiasm for RIZIN and for Seika Izawa. I think it's cool that she is getting some attention, but I think she could be a big star, but I don't think that she's hit that level yet. If I just look at her Instagram following right now, oh yeah, she goes by Starflower on Instagram. So she's just got over 10K Instagram followers. So I think that she hasn't quite hit her. I think that all of her best years are ahead of her. I don't know how much longer does she have at this level? She's fighting Claire Lopez this weekend, which is another good fight. I still pick Izawa to handily win that fight, but yeah, very interesting to see how she evolves and how much longer she can fight at this level. Okay, yeah, James Kendrick. Did you know that Weili has been training with Nonito Donaire, who is fighting on the undercard of Spence Crawford whenever she's in Vegas? Oh, I didn't know that. That's cool. Jack Slack described her as a sponge. Do you agree? I think that's a great way to describe Zhang Weili's posture towards learning. She is definitely a sponge. We saw what happened when we put her training with Josh Hinger at Bong Tao, and her BJJ reached a new level and looked really sharp on the ground against Carla Esparza. Yeah, that's very cool. I'll have to look into that. Why isn't there a BMF title for females? To me, a BMF is someone who takes a fight anytime, anywhere, and doesn't duck opponents. I would add at the highest elite level, but I know what you're saying. Unlike the current 115-pound champion, skip line twice, it doesn't work hard. Well, why isn't there a BMF title for females? This whole BMF concept is still being developed, right? This is only the second time we've had this belt on the line, and we still don't really know the rules of it, right? Is it like what weight class is it at? If it stays at lightweight, could we ever have a BMF belt at light heavyweight or middleweight? And can this belt, could it ever be merged with one of the regular UFC titles if the belt holder retires, or do they have any kind of obligation to defend it, right? So there's a lot of rules that are kind of sketchy. it's a gimmick, but I thought I heard something on Luke Thomas and Brian Campbell's show this week that I thought was really interesting. Of course, they were credit. They had heard it from another guy, and I feel bad that I can't remember who they were quoting. Go back and check out that podcast and listen to the full episode. But they were basically saying, like, it's not the UFC that makes the belt; it's the fighters that make the belt. And that, I think, that gave me a little bit more appreciation for the BMF title. It doesn't do a lot for me, whether or not the belt is on the line in the main event this weekend. Doesn't do a whole lot for me. Doesn't make me want to watch the fight anymore. But the rules, we still haven't really figured out what the rules are for this belt. Someday there could be a women's BMF title. I think that you will, if this like continues, if we get like an annual defense of the BMF title, then I think you will see a female version of it either next year or maybe the year after. But I think we need to kind of see if this belt is going to go anywhere. Dustin Poirier, say he wins the BMF belt this weekend, he could, in my opinion, be at the end of his career. He's 34 years old. I've heard him kind of float the idea of retirement out there a few times. He's definitely done everything that you can do in the UFC. So if he wins the belt, could he retire and then it's vacant again? And then it could be up for grabs in any weight class where there's two fighters where it makes sense. So I'm guessing the rules are going to be made up as we go. But yeah, I think you'll see it in time. The baddest mother title. There you go. I love it. Yeah, put like Mackenzie Dern in there. You could put like Raquel Pennington, or I don't know. A lot of good options. I find it funny that none of the champions wanted to fight at UFC 291 since it is an elevation, which is hard to acclimatize to. Yeah, not sure what the story was there. They had 2 title fights at UFC 290, got 2 title fights at UFC 292. They really wanted that Boston card to be big, so they wanted the 2 title fights there. They really wanted the International Fight Week card to be big, so they put 2 title fights there. They had trouble finding title fights for UFC 289. We got the women's bantamweight title there. So I think just in general, they're having a little bit of a hard time this whole summer finding really big title fights to put together. I think we'll get more of those in the fall. So yeah, I mean, we usually get like one non-title fight a year in a pay-per-view main event. It's the BMF title, but I kind of see it as a non-title fight in function. But yeah, I think it's fine. You know, I was looking back at some old like UFC events from like 2007, 2008, because I was really wondering, like, how did the UFC put on 12 pay-per-views a year when they only had 5 weight classes? And now we have, what, 10, 11, 12 weight classes. And sometimes it can come down to the wire, you know, like UFC 289, UFC 291, trying to find title fights for the card. So, but yeah, there was just, back in the day, there was a lot more non-title fights. Sometimes not even like big non-title fights necessarily. I mean, they've got BMF title this weekend, but at one point they had like Rashad Evans versus Tito Ortiz. They had Dan Henderson versus Rich Franklin, which were all like pretty good fights, but not necessarily like blockbuster non-title fights. Closest I remember in recent years is Jorge Masvidal versus Colby Covington, which was like, it had like a fair amount of beef to it, but it wasn't really like, I think in our minds, we kind of all knew that Colby Covington was going to run away with it. But yeah, there used to be a lot more non-title fights in the UFC, and I don't mind them as long as they're really, really good fights and 2 guys that can command the buy. I was actually talking to a friend today. I was at a coffee shop today and talking to a friend, and I was asking him like, hey man, you gonna buy the card this weekend? And he was like, maybe, probably not. A lot of good fights on the card. A lot of fights that are probably gonna be really entertaining, but like not quite there at where I'm ready to drop like $80 to buy a UFC card. And like, yeah, I understand that. A lot of good fights, but that'll probably be entertaining. But I agree. Let's see. What advantages do you think does Xiaonan have over Weili? Xiaonan's not faster, not stronger, more technical, doesn't have the wrestling, and nearly armbarred herself against Carla Esparza. Yeah, that's a great question. I am not sure how to answer that. Because personally, yeah, I would pick Zhang Weili in pretty much every category over Yan Xiaonan. Yan Xiaonan did knock out Jessica Andrade in her last fight, so she does have some firepower. She strikes in pretty like good volume at times, and so if I'm Yan Xiaonan's coach and I'm devising a strategy against Zhang Weili, I feel like, yeah, trying to keep the fight standing and trying to outland Weili, but it's tough. I would have a hard time like really feeling confident on a strategy against Weili unless you are able to pick something apart and find Weili's weak points. Maybe that's like a video I'll try to do if that fight ever gets made. What kind of strategy I would use to try and beat Zhang Weili. Probably will be a little bit above my pay grade, but could be interesting. Watch your words about Ireland. I know I saw someone tweet like this week about who was it, Aaron Bronstetter, that said something like, UFC's trying to get back to the UK, and Dublin is an option for the UFC next year. And I know I had a lack of words of like, I know it's like, yeah, I know Ireland's not part of the UK, but it's in that area. But yeah, the Longshan Torch Festival, I know, kind of a wacky event, but entertaining what I saw. Thanks, always love hearing your opinions. We're on to you, Drake Riggs. Hey, Drake's a great guy. Yeah, love his work, love his niche that he's been able to carve out in the sport. Provides just a lot of really unique content. Really appreciate him giving Japanese MMA more of a spectrum in the wider MMA ecosystem. You see what I did there? Look, I love Azawa. She has a fun grappling style, but facts are facts when we look at 22 and who did work. Yeah, but she's still young. She can still keep growing. So let's keep watching her. Let's see. Don't know if it's been mentioned in the stream yet, but shout out to Ryoji Kudo. Yeah, Kudo recently retired after going 0-2 in the PFL season this year. Yeah, I meant to mention that, but he did retire. Kind of a bummer that's like what most MMA fans think of him as is coming up short in the PFL. He had some like successful moments in the PFL, but he did just get really tough matchups like the rest of the Japanese fighters. Wish that he would have gotten to like feel out his way a little bit more at the higher levels, but it is what it is, and hope that he has a good post-retirement career. To add, to my earlier question about potential Weili versus Xiaonan. Weili also has better cardio, I agree, and volume. Yeah, it's not that I said that Weili doesn't put out volume. It's just that Xiaonan does as well. And able to keep a pace with Joanna and Rose for 5 rounds, whereas Xiaonan is known to slow down for the round. Exactly. That is the question. I think that you're right that this is a bad matchup for Yan Xiaonan, and But she is rapidly getting better. People talk about Zhang Weili getting better, being a sponge. I think that Yan Xiaonan is also a sponge, and she is also improving really quickly. I think that Team Alpha Male has been a really good fit for her. She's had a lot of success with them, beating Jessica Andrade, beating Mackenzie Dern. Really impressive high-level wins there. And a lot of people were counting her out, picking against her in those fights, but she rose to the occasion. So we could see Yan Xiaonan. Here's me trying to just be an optimist, trying to sell a fight here, but like definitely lean pretty hard towards Zhang Weili in that fight, but I would think that Yan Xiaonan would rise to the occasion and probably put on a more competitive fight than we might expect. But yeah, and yeah, just to close it out, thinking that the end of Ryoji Kudo's career mirrors a lot of guys that compete under this strenuous PFL schedule. I think that is like one of the hard things about PFL's format at this time. They're like, I know that they've got 2 tiers now with challengers and with the main season, but it's not really like you really do if you're like a matchmaker and a scout for PFL, you really are trying to get fighters that are like at the exact same level, or fighters that you feel really confident that could compete with any other fighter in that pool, because it is a little bit, not totally round robin, but like any fighter could be matched up with any fighter. There's no ranking system there. That could be a knock on the PFL's format, which the counter argument would be like, well, that's the way other pro sports are. If you have teams in the MLB, in like a Midwest conference or a Western conference, they're going to all play each other. And sure, like the weakest team is probably going to lose a lot of those games. But the counter argument to that counter argument would be like, well, yeah, but like in the MLB, they play so many times. They play like 5 or 6 times a week. Whereas like you can still get lucky and win a couple times, even if you lose. Whereas like PFL, you only have 2 chances in the regular season. And if you get matched up against the 2 hardest guys, you're just kind of out of luck. So interesting how that works. And that's been really, really hard for the Asian fighters. Like I think Japanese fighters won or lost every single fight in this season this year, which is a shame. I think eventually they'll start to figure it out. Things will even out. The talent will continue to improve that they're able to recruit. But at least this year, yeah, Asia just totally struck out, which is a shame. Yeah, Mato Nishikawa fighting Collard and Burgos, he had no business fighting those guys. He's only 20 years old. He should be fighting other fighters that are experienced, but not at that highest level. Burgos, for the love, man, like Nishikawa basically fighting like a ranked UFC featherweight, way out of his league. I wish they would have put Nishikawa on the Challenger Series instead. Eventually, they will have an Asian league. I've heard that from Lauren Mack himself. He's told me that Lauren Mack is an exec with PFL, but yeah, kind of wonky. PFL is a lot of things that they're still sorting out. Right, their format has a lot of kinks that need to be worked out. I think it can still improve, but it does have a lot of kinks to work out. Not to mention just like figuring out the roster, like improving the roster, finding the balance between rotating fighters out of the roster versus putting new fighters in. Also, like keeping fighters around and giving them a career there. So a lot of interesting things to work out, comparing like MMA in a league format versus other pro team sports in a league format. Can it work? Can it not? PFL is figuring out all those kinks right now. So props to them for like taking the risk, trying to figure it out and get something new going. So yeah, but Okay. One more. What do you think is going to happen with the next UFC Australia card? What a mess. So I'm glad you asked about this because I've been thinking about this a lot recently, and this will be the last question for today. But I think we're starting to see some of the problem with the UFC's schedule and how it's less about just like literally going around the whole globe as it is like we have a deal with Australia's tourism board. We have a deal with Abu Dhabi's tourism board. We have a deal with Singapore's tourism board. We have a deal with this venue in Las Vegas, whatever. Like, with both with Abu Dhabi was close this year, and I think like with Abu Dhabi, I'm not sure if there was any formal deal in place, but it sounded like they were like, we're coming to Abu Dhabi and we're going to put Islam Makhachev in the main event. No matter what fight pans out, we're just going to make that happen. And it seemed like it was kind of the same situation with Australia and Israel Adesanya, where they're like, yeah, we're going to come back. Because Dana White actually didn't he say, like, when he announced the Whitaker-Duplessis fight, he said, the winner of this fight will fight Israel Adesanya in the main event at an event in Australia later this year. And that almost bit him in the butt. Like, it's really risky to, I mean, the UFC's been doing this for years, like saying, yeah, we're coming to Australia, whatever. But sometimes I think they haven't always like promised that a certain fighter is going to be in the main event. And that was really risky doing that with Adesanya this time, because they put this fight together with Duplessis and Whitaker in July, trying to figure out a number one contender. And of course, the big problem with that was, what if a guy gets hurt, which happened? Duplessis is hurt, can't fight Adesanya, even though that's the really big fight, even though that's the fight that they technically should just wait for and let that happen organically. But instead, they've already kind of committed Adesanya to the main event of UFC 293. And I felt like Sean Strickland would be a good enough main event. I thought that fight could eventually sell, even though I would have picked Adesanya to win that fight. I think most people would have too. It would have at least been a new challenge for Adesanya. Would have been really interesting. Strickland was down for it. I don't know why. Like, I think Ariel Helwani tweeted today like that Adesanya and Strickland were down to fight each other, but for some reason the UFC doesn't want that fight. I heard someone else tweet today, which I don't know if there's any validity to it. Maybe it was even from yesterday that the UFC was thinking about putting Jared freaking Cannonier in the main event, which would be, I don't see how that's more appealing than Sean Strickland. Like, Sean Strickland literally just beat him, right? No, Cannonier, right? Oh yeah, that's right. Cannonier just beat Marvin Vettori. Sometimes I get so mixed up. Like, who just beat who? All these guys have fought each other, but yeah, Cannonier and Adesanya have already fought. It was not a great fight. Why would we have this fight again? Why in a million years would we ever choose Cannonier over Strickland? I have no idea. Strickland is infinitely more appealing to me than Adesanya. So I don't know. It's kind of a mess. I think the other option, if I'm the UFC, is to think like, okay, like, what if we just shelf middleweight for right now? What are the next two title fights that we can put together for September? Can we put together a women's bantamweight title fight, and then maybe one other fight for Australia? It needs, I think right now there's only 4 fights on the main card. So maybe, who knows, maybe they'll put like a women's bantamweight title fight on there anyways. But yeah, it's a mess. Hopefully the UFC changes their mind and goes to Strickland. I think that if like nothing can come together, I think they'll probably just do it. But that's how I think it'll play out. But thanks so much, guys, for tuning in. That is all I've got for you today. Really appreciate all your great questions. Love these Thursday afternoons where I just get to talk about fights, get to talk about Asian MMA. Yeah, over time, I just want to keep putting more and more into this podcast, have more and more for you, have more visuals, be able to talk through some different things analytically. So keep it locked here on Thursday afternoons and evenings, or whatever what time this is for you. Really appreciate your support, and subscribe to the channel if you have not. But enjoy those great fights in Salt Lake City this weekend, and have yourself a great day.